All right, so we're going to be hitting another negative argument today on the Jan-Feb topic coming up. Just to quickly get right into what we're talking about, hopefully this should be a short one, but we'll still try and make it a bit quick. As always, the structure of this is going to be first we're going to explain the argument, then move on to framework, then rebuttals, lastly finishing up with my personal thoughts on the argument. So simply getting right into it, let's bring up the argument. Now this is I don't think this argument could get more simpler. I think this is probably one of the easiest arguments we're going to discuss in all of these videos. Um, it's simply this idea that any ban that we bring up isn't going to work, and other countries are going to break the ban, or maybe the United States, it doesn't really matter, and will still produce lethal autonomous weapons. That's it. The entire idea behind this is that it makes it to where any impacts that the affirmative brings up are essentially just completely devoided. Because it's even if there are some benefits to removing lethal autonomous weapons, they're still going to be there, so the ban doesn't actually do anything. So my issue with this is that it doesn't give any offense. I have several issues with this, as we'll come to talk about throughout this. But there's no offense for this argument, right? Because there's just because bans are going to fail, that's not a reason to not have a ban. I mean, I guess it kind of is, but it's really not a reason to not have a ban, right? Simply because not everyone's going to adhere to it doesn't mean that it's inherently bad, because it doesn't actually give us any reason why lethal autonomous weapons are good. It just gives us a reason why banning it essentially makes the whole debate a wash, right? Because if nothing's changing from the affirmative to negative, then why would you vote either way, right? The debate then becomes completely pointless. So this is why this one's going to be really short. There's not a whole lot to say on framework because of this argument, because like I said, it doesn't actually offer any impacts, any offense, or anything. So there's no real way to give an framing to bring this up, right? Because no matter what, you're not going to be achieving a value criterion or a value. So the only thing that could be run is a practicality framework, and saying that you inherently have to prove that something is practical and can actually be done for it to be moral, which those cards are out there, but it's just this. It still doesn't really so I guess you are promoting practicality in the actual forum of the debate, but it still doesn't really provide anything to be done on that front. There's no actual impacts, there's no offense, no reason to vote neg. So moving on to rebuttals, we're definitely blasting through this one. The rebuttal on this one mainly is just going to be essentially proving that practicality doesn't matter, which I see this argument all the time. So I'll tell you exactly what I would say in this case. Sorry, it's getting late and I'm getting tired. So I would say that the resolution is defined as states ought to ban lethal autonomous weapons. And simply because we ought to do something doesn't mean that's immediately practical in the here and now. For instance, if I owe someone money, I ought to pay them back on time. However, I may not have the funds to do so. Simply because it's impractical for me to do so and I don't have the ability to do it doesn't mean that I don't ought to do it. I still have that moral responsibility to do so, even if not immediately possible. So very clearly from that just little spiel, we can see that we can argue that practicality is not actually linked to morality, and that what we ought to do is completely different from practicality itself. So that'd be my main response. Beyond that, you could just bring up that it literally just makes the whole debate a wash, and then you could even put that back to the whole idea of the debate, which so what I mean by that is literally being clearly the whole whenever this topic was proposed, we aren't meant to debate whether or not this could actually happen, because if my opponent is correct in that we're not going to see this ban be upheld, then there is no actual distinction between the affirmative and negative side. No debate can occur. Therefore, and to actually protect what the whole point of us gathering here to do is, which is to debate, we ought to view this as if the ban is going to work and as if we are actually going to see lethal autonomous weapons in the status quo and not see them in the affirmative world. That way we can actually further like the activity of debate. That was like kind of a long and convoluted way of structuring that, and that's why you wouldn't want to say that exactly in round. But you can basically just literally be like, yeah, my opponent is harming debate because he's not allowing us to actually have discourse, which is the whole point. Like when the affirmative and negative side become the same thing, what's the point in actually discussing those two different forms as in like opposing stances? So that'd be my other one. Like if you really need to, I just think saying that practicality is not linked to morality is a better one. But also like, yeah, legitimately they're not actually like allowing for debate to occur, so that's still a good argument, especially if you have like a flow judge, because like that'd be super convincing to me personally, because I'd be like, yeah, you're kind of ruining debate and that's frustrating, so vote you down. Man, we're really early into this one, but I'm just going to move right into what I personally think about this argument. And as I'm sure you can tell, I hate it for a lot of different reasons. Part of it is that it offers no offense. So right off the bat, it's like this isn't an argument really, but people are still going to use that as an argument, which is disgusting. Well, like it is an argument, but it's not actually like it's a rebuttal more than it is a contention, and yet people are still going to use it as contentions. Um, Beyond that, I also think the whole idea behind the argument is like converse to the idea of LD anyway. Like the whole point of Lincoln Douglas debate is to be a debate of morals and what we ought to do, and I legitimately like stand by this idea that practicality is not linked to it, because like that's why we also don't argue about like what the possibility of the ban being passed is, because that's not the point. It's not about whether or not it could happen or if it's going to be effective, but it's clearly that the point of the debate is to ask essentially, is like removing lethal autonomous weapons worthwhile? I don't know why the screen just went black for a second. Would it be worthwhile? And if it was possible, let me see if it's still recording. Okay, I was just afraid that was going to pop out when the screen went black. And if it was worthwhile, then we should vote affirmative. So very clearly, like we're not supposed to be talking about how effective a ban is going to be at actually banning lethal autonomous weapons. We talk about how effective that is going to be about actually bettering society. So that's my biggest issues with this, is that it just like inherently goes against this idea of like debate and discourse and all these things that we hold dear, because it's like this like it's meant to be tricky argument, and it's not a good one, I don't think. So personally, would not run it. Would not recommend you guys running it, but if you do run it, I think less of you as a debater because of it. So there's that. Otherwise, I don't have too much more to say about this. Like I'm sure I could continue to rant and complain about this for 2 more minutes. But I guess we'll just use this last time to just kind of like generally look at the negative side just very briefly. I think definitely, generally, whenever you have like the affirmative and negative side, like the affirmative, you can have like a greater range of frameworks with. But I think just like almost in every situation, the negative side is going to be like pretty much just pure consequentialism, because generally, like that's what you're gonna have to go with, right? Because like there's the whole point of like the affirmative and being able to get more moral high ground stuff is that it's like, oh, we should end this bad thing in society, right? Like this inherent harm that is like adverse to human dignity or whatever you want to talk about. But you don't really have that option in the negative, because there's hardly any situation where we can say that choosing inaction is actually going to like help protect people, because like most of the time we think of inaction as being the thing that like gives way to like bad social institutions like racism or whatever. Which is why it's generally consequentialism on the neg, which is something I think we're going to see a continuation of here. I think pretty much every argument that you're going to be able to use is going to be some form of consequentialism, just because like those are generally the arguments that are presented in this case. And obviously that's what we're seeing on the affirmative as well, so I guess that's not really saying much, right? Because like on the affirmative, we're still seeing things such as like people who are being, we're seeing things like promoting, wow, I just completely lost my train of thought for a second. We're seeing things such as like protecting lives and stopping war crimes and those general things, even though that's also an argument on the negative side, which are still consequentialist itself, but we can still see like a greater use possibly of deontological frameworks if we really need to on the affirmative side. But that's just kind of the general thoughts I wanted to get out so we could fill that little bit of time. But now that we're approaching our 10-minute mark, I suppose it's about time to end this one. So as always, I hope this video was educational, and I wish you guys good luck in all your rounds.